Welcome. I'm Sherry Torres, the co-author with Jackie Stavros of Conversations Worth Having. She and I are excited you are joining us for the first of a four-part series on conversations worth having for a more civil society. The topic for this session is transforming polarization. First, I would like to introduce you to our speakers. Jane Woods is joining us from the UK. After a long career in pharmaceutical sales, working mainly in oncology and alongside the National Health Service, Jane is now coaching NHS staff, private sector clients, and people recovering from or living with cancer. Emotional well-being is the area she specializes in, and whether it's coaching, facilitating, or training, she loves that spark and the magic of connection, growth, and healing. She says the practices of conversations worth having fuel her curiosity of what's possible when we connect with ourselves, with each other, and the natural world. Fran VanHouten has helped hundreds of people have important conversations. As an IAF certified professional facilitator and an ICF credentialed coach, Fran has a knack for unlocking the assumptions or the misunderstandings that hold people back. She has been a student of appreciative inquiry for over a decade, and Conversations Worth Having has a framework that has become her go-to resource for her professional practice and actually her life. She describes CWH as the Swiss Army knife of productive conversations and rich experiences. It's adaptive, it's easy to deploy, and the resource is always in your pocket. Her professional journey reflects a series of plot twists from her undergraduate studies and degree in mechanical engineering to where she is now. She can't wait to see what happens next, including what emerges here today. Tara Kuipers lives in northern Wyoming and serves businesses, nonprofits, and communities across the nation as a facilitator, educator, consultant, and coach. She frequently supports organizations seeking to provide meaningful and civil public engagement opportunities, particularly around natural resources, outdoor recreation, and conservation-related issues. When she isn't working, you will find her outside playing. We are so grateful the three of you have agreed to bring your ideas, your wisdom, and your stories to a topic that is so vital to the world today. Social media and the algorithms that drive it seem to have torn the fabric of our relationships in families, communities, and the workplace. Tara, Fran, and Jane, how might we change that? What can each of us do to turn potentially polarizing situations into conversations worth having?
Excellent. Oh, hello. We're gonna pull the curtain back, I think, immediately upon beginning this session and say that we have very little scripted, and really the opportunity to talk about polarization and transforming polarization is going to unfold in what we hope is a meaningful conversation amongst the three of us, and then inviting everyone else into it. So we've already revealed our secret that we don't have a lot of scripted content to share in a traditional speaker way. It's really just an opportunity to share some of our thoughts and experiences. So we just revealed the big secret.
And when we had a planning call, was it last week? I think it was, the three of us sort of chatted and we just hit it off so easily that we just thought we would just continue that momentum and then bring you all along with that. And what I was thinking about this morning was how each of us sort of use Conversations Worth Having model. So should we start there just to brush off the dust from our conversation last week?
That'd be great.
That sounds great.
Great.
Jane, you want to take it?
Yeah, thank you, Fran. In fact, I think we were just talking about the name it, flip it, frame it model. And this week, my husband and I were both training, which was a delight in itself. but we were working with some young people in the outdoor industry, and a lot of the conversation was around compliance. It's a very safety critical environment. So we looked at some of their scenarios and put it through the name it, flip it, frame it. The boxes that we have, if you see it on a visual, and they really loved this. It was a very visual way of doing it. And I think for something around compliance, where a lot of situations and scenarios were very much about, this is what we can't do. I'm imagining that for a lot of people that will resonate. It certainly did for me in the world of pharmaceuticals, where it was very heavily compliance. So if you put that into the sort of the naming it, it was, this is what we can't do. And it could become, and some of the conversations were very fixed on that. And then when they realized, well, what's the opposite of that? And it took a little time for them, because I think a lot of the thinking is very entrenched. It's very behavioral, so very fixed in terms of behavior. So I think giving people time to pause, to think about what is the opposite? How do we flip that? Mm-hmm. When there's something like compliance, where this is the way we do it, these are our operating procedures. So they then flipped it, and we could do it. We could do it this way. And then what are the benefits from doing that? Well, it means that people are safe. And I think they realized that was a really good thing for their organization, and quite a good selling point that they hadn't really made much of. So it worked really well in that scenario. So that's just one little example. And I'm going to sort of pass the baton maybe to Tara, actually, because the word emotion came up quite a lot in our previous conversation. Yeah. And I wondered if that might be something to...
Absolutely. Jane, as you were speaking about the compliance related conversation, I was realizing, some of the things that were going through my mind, where I often think of, and I think in its definition, compliance is, this is what's inside the box, this is what's outside, this is what we will do, this is what we won't do. And I think, there's opportunities for polarization to arise there. And this is what we will and won't do. And those are polars. That's the definition. And then I think there's this other area where I often think about polarization, which is, just really, defining what we often will label a polarizing issue. Often they're very emotional issues. They're intensely personal issues. I often think of, if we took that word polarization just out of the vocabulary, what would we replace it with? And I think in the compliance scenario that you just shared, polarization would be, just heavily defined, and, you can grab onto one side or another, and it's very clear. I think another scenario would be if you took the word polarization out of the vocab and had to put something else in. I a lot of times would put in words just intensely complex and, really hard to get your arms around something that's big and messy. And a lot of times it does have that connotation of emotion embedded in it. It's personal, and it's your own preferences and needs being represented in an issue that brings up a lot of really intensely personal things. So I think the title of this call being Transforming Polarization, I think we start perhaps with defining polarization or breaking down what it means that it's a polarizing issue. And I often do that in clients where I'm working with, larger issues on a larger in terms of like a public scale. And they're like, oh, this is going to be a tricky topic to talk about. It's like, well, why? And usually when it's why is that tricky or polarizing, it's because it's attached to a lot of emotion, and it's attached to a lot of complexity that we struggle to get our arms around and get our hands around. So I think, the question that Fran launched us in was how we use CWH in these transforming polarization conversations. I often think about using some of the generative questions to really understand the issue, to kind of get our arms around it, and maybe even redefine it or reframe it in the less about polarization and more about acknowledging the emotion, the complexity, the intense individuality that comes up. And that often serves me well when approaching these issues, is to just break down what polarization is or how we define it. So, Fran, how about you? Can we turn your question onto yourself and understand your approach?
Well, and I so appreciate the framing, Tara, about sort of defining what polarization is, because for me, what I find so valuable with this framework and in navigating sort of escalated, elevated conflicts or tensions or whatever they are, which I think is often where those differences lie, is not only as a tool for navigating the conversation and structuring the conversation, that is a way for people to get their head in the game. For me to know, am I above or below the line? Am I coming from a directive voice? Am I coming from a spirit of inquiry? What's my highest aspiration in the context in which I've been invited in? Like my favorite question that sometimes I have to, float on the water like I'm fly fishing in a really gentle way. But even in the most polarized or tension-filled conversations, to pause the action, to have people take a breath and to say, how could this be our finest moment? How is this a gift? And what I've learned about myself is that I think we all know this. We see what we look for. So if I'm looking for conflict and disagreement and tension and something that's not going to be solved, sure as hell I'm going to find it. Right? But when I can say, all right, how could this be our finest moment? How can we look back on this and say that's where everything was different? And I will tell you, I asked that question as part of working as part of a facilitation team in a United States university where racial tensions had become escalated to the point where graduate students and faculty were just completely divided. And we were still doing a series of discovery interviews to try to not only understand the landscape more fully, but also to de-escalate things a little bit by having people talk to us and vent to us a little bit. And it was one of those things where people were very much, and I don't mean this in a disparaging way, but people were very much standing on principle. And I don't think principle can be really negotiated, right? Like that, people sort of have a need to be right when they're leaning on principle. And so when I would ask the question, I would say, this question may be off-putting, but how can this be our finest hour? How can this be this university's or this department's finest hour? And it was amazing the impact it had in that group, because everything just paused and the action just slowed down. And they were able to have the conversation in just, I think, with more accountability. They saw more of their responsibility in the conversation rather than just adding fuel to the fire. So anything there to work off of, Jane, Tara?
Well, there's a dot that I'm interested in connecting, I think, in what you just shared, Fran, and what Jane shared earlier about that sense of responsibility. And I think I heard that embedded in Jane's conversation as well. And Fran, you talked about, shifting that opportunity to kind of see yourself in what happens next. And I really heard that too, Jane, with I'm really thinking a lot about that compliance in story, because it's so different than how I often interact with what I label or what I consider polarization. But that sense of the opportunity where staying in those polarized conversations doesn't layer on a sense of what do we do next? What do we do now for our institution, for our company? And it personalizes it in a productive way. It offers the opportunity to take responsibility in what next, in what I say next, what I do next, what we say and do next as a team or as an institution. So that sense of responsibility, I felt like was embedded in both of what you shared.
And Tara, picking up on that, there was something there, it's that shift between suddenly when people take that spotlight or that breath, I think you mentioned it's that break, taking a breath to realize this isn't just about me, this is about us, this is about you and me, this is about our organization, this is about our department, our organization, this is about maybe the industry that we're in, and this maybe is also about our environment that we're in. And there was a moment, again, working with this group where we were looking at feedback and giving and receiving feedback. And we looked at some of the above and below the line kind of behaviors. And what was so lovely, I said, where do you want to spend your time? Do you want to spend time on those conversations that are really energy zapping, which are very polarizing, very personal, very emotional? You know, you mentioned appraisal time and there's instantly, do you want to spend time in those conversations that are very personal and very, energy zapping, or do you want to open this out as to, what's more objective, what's in this for all of us? How can we make this work for all of us? I've seen some great some great moments, from you recently. Maybe, how could we work that out and ripple that out to everybody else? And what was so lovely was these young people, we were outside, they were using natural foraging. We went foraging and they were picking up, they had the choice of using leaves or nettles. Are it stingy? Are our conversations a bit stingy, or prickles? Well, our conversations a little bit prickly. And they were naturally gravitating to the blossoming, the flowery conversations, the feathers, the conversations that were taking flight. And being outside was just helping them with this whole process in thinking about us in a more expansive, even ecological way. It was lovely.
There's a question from Tamara. She wanted to know if you could talk a little bit more about the strategy of name it, flip it, frame it in terms of how to change these complex, personal, emotional topics. How do you flip it and frame it? How do you make that happen?
Who wants to give the name it, flip it, frame it 101?
Jane, do you want to do it? Because you were saying it earlier that you had just done that with the team. Do you want to talk through that?
So in this particular instance this week, I can talk about some very personal instance of this where I've had very polarizing conversations with family members. But thinking about this week, it was around, I think sometimes people skirt around what the issue is, and by actually getting and naming it and getting it out there and putting it on the table, I think there's a little bit of a relief that people are naming maybe this elephant in the room that people have been skirting around. So naming it can be very helpful. I think what also came out of that process, certainly this week, was, are we actually focusing on the right challenge, the right issue here? Is this really what is holding us back? So a little bit of questioning and generative questioning into actually, is this really the issue? So I think being able to name it can be quite a relief. I work a lot with the NHS, and just being able to vent for a little while and naming what's on their mind and giving permission to people, for people to actually call it out, at the moment can be quite a cathartic thing. And then asking people, well, what is the opposite of that? And that's where I find, flipping it. So this is the issue. And then flipping it, often I find that's when people need that time and that pause, because there's so much in that that way of behavior and thinking that they're then having to really give some thought and energy to what is it that I really want. Because very often they're talking about what they don't want. So flipping it to what they do want, it's great to allow people time in that process. So certainly, again, within the NHS environment, that's where we would spend quite a lot of time, because there's so much that's, I had an instance where we had a consultant where he talked for 2 hours on everything that was wrong with the NHS. And it was really sad. I've worked for the NHS for a long time, and I just thought, no, we can't give up on the NHS. And so the question was sort of asked, so that's everything on a bad day, but what does it look like for you on a good day? And he said, well, I can recall this really good day, and this is why I came into the medical profession. I care about patients. That's the flip, everything that's wrong. But what's right is I care about my patients. I really want to make a difference. And he went on to expand on a day where he'd actually saved a patient's life. He'd changed the mind of his senior consultant in a diagnosis. And he was so living that moment, it became very emotional for him, and he started crying because he remembered everything about why he was working in the NHS. And it was quite a turning point. And he just remembered that, yeah, I am here to make a difference. And I want to make a difference.
Yeah.
That's beautifully said, Jane.
And I have to thank Sherry for putting the comment in the chat that she did that outlined the framework, because I will confess to Sherry and Jackie that when I explain flip it, name it, flip it, frame it, when I get to frame, I'm like, I don't remember the frame, but I'm just going to say, if we're already on that trajectory of flipping it, what do we really want? Like, okay, if we're already headed in that direction, then let's really get there. What's really our north? And so, Sherry, as I was reading the chat, I'm like, okay, I'm not messing up the framework like crazy. I got the spirit of it. Like, yeah, we're not just going to settle for the exact opposite of, what we have. We want to add some rocket fuel to it and get to really what we aspire to be. So thank you for the cheat notes, Cherry.
I want to, before that awesome question came in and the awesome explanation, Jane, that you offered, there was something you said that I want to pick up on, because I think there's something really meaningful about how this happens within polarization or polarizing contexts. And Jane, I think the way that you said it was, in the organizational conversation, it was like, do we really want to stay here? When we name it, like, I can't remember exactly the words that you used, but it made me think about, like, is this what we want to be focusing on? Do we want to stay here? And I think as you said it, I got the mental image of, like, we're kind of in the valley, we're kind of in the low spot, and where do we want to go instead? And I think it's really interesting, when you invite people to do something different than being in that low spot, kind of being in the swampy spot, that's doesn't feel good. It doesn't always smell good and taste good. Like, it's just kind of not where you want to be. Though that place, there's so many other things we can do to invite people out of there, but it is so comfortable. It's uncomfortably comfortable. It's where I think there's such a power of defaulting there. And so inviting people to the flip, as we were just describing, or inviting people to have a different conversation. I think of this in the context, I work a lot with, public agencies, a state or a federal agency that's doing like public engagement. So, I call them like sometimes it's a y'all come meeting, right? Like we're going to open the community center at 7:00 and it's going to be a public input. And there's wonderful and awful examples of what those public meetings sometimes look like. But I think there's almost a script that you follow, right? You come in and you say all the things that are wrong, and we default into those places of kind of that low spot. And I think on these contexts, whether it's a one-on-one conversation or in a family context, or I often apply it in my mind to these like public contexts, we have to invite people to have a conversation that they have maybe never had before. Maybe not them, maybe not for generations. There is an inertia that's really powerful. I think of, Fran, the conversations that you talked about in terms of looking at racial dynamics. Like these are not just conversations, like we just don't default to them as an individual, but we default to them as a society and maybe even generationally. So that invitation to do something different, to talk about something different is so powerful. But wow, it can be foreign and scary and off-putting. So I was really wanting to see if either of you have experienced that or can say more about that. Fran's ready to go.
Yeah, I'm teed up on that, because I think, Tara, what you're describing is exactly like my point about CWH as a Swiss Army knife. I think that these conversations haven't happened because people don't know how to have these conversations. And the roadmap of CWH really says this is the way we can have these conversations, which, as long as we abide by sort of the guidelines and the spirit of the conversation, nobody's going to be harmed. And we will likely leave with new information. Now, we may not have agreement, but in my work as a facilitator, I never focus on agreement. I always focus on shared understanding, because I'm not going to get to agreement unless I have understanding first. So let me change the measure, right? And so, because that one I can win understanding. We got that one down. And so that's where, for me, this framework is so useful, because it's like when the three of us, probably all of us, are invited into these spaces where we don't know what's going to happen in that room with these players. Here is this gift that is not only stabilizing for me, but is stabilizing, and I can share that, and I can pause things and say, I want you to think about this from this framework. Let's approach this conversation, because it does feel risky. It does feel dangerous. And let's practice. Let's give ourselves some skills in this, and let's have our desired outcome or a success measured by the degree in which we learn something. Right. I'm drinking what you're selling, Tara, like in a really big way.
Yeah, it's that changing that metric, right? And I think that's maybe a really valuable, principle or lesson in, we talked about the fact that we didn't have a script for this session. It's kind of just our generative conversation that we're able to have. But I think if there was a lesson or a headline that gets taken away, it's that we think about, with transforming polarization. Part of it is, maybe how we label it or define polarization, and thinking deeply about what we mean when we say polarization. And then I think, it's what I hear you say is it's thinking deeply about what it means to transform it. And it isn't making everybody lockstep in agreement. It's understanding, shifting that metric. If there's a goalpost that we can set up as a worthy and exceptionally valuable end point or waypoint, because it's never going to be the end point, right? It's just a waypoint. It's the opportunity to deepen understanding. Then you can get somewhere. So shifting what we're trying to do in the transformation of polarization.
Totally. And if I can just share one more metaphor, and then I'll stand down.
Please don't.
but because of I love physics. I just love physics, and I see everything, even human interaction, from like a physics mind, equal and opposite reactions and all that kind of stuff. And when I think about the things that are polarized, I often think about, what are the differences among us that make a difference, right? Because that's that sense of difference that is often the source of misalignment. And often the metaphor that I use with some of my groups is the idea of a waterfall. A waterfall really is about, in this case, differences in elevation. But think of the power and the energy that resides in that difference. Mm-hmm. And the invitation that we have is how to harness that in a productive way, right? How to use that to go from, potential energy of the water not moving to actually having it flow. And now we've got kinetic energy, something we can really harness and bring alive. But I'm always trying to have people just look at the same thing, but maybe from this angle, and just see maybe a different opportunity that way. So, yeah. Jane, what's alive for you as this is all happening here?
Thank you so much for those, because it's really, I love this measuring success by how much we learn. I've written that down because that's just such a jewel. I wanted desperately to keep that connection. And I think that's the word for me that really stands out. It's, are we in connection? Even if we're not in agreement, are we in some kind of connection and looking for and seeking some kind of shared understanding? And in that conversation, it was around pausing for me, taking a breath and saying, Jane, just hold back, step back, and asking some questions on why he felt those particular people were resonating for him. What were his friends thinking? Maybe, had he had discussions with his friends? What were the things that were really important to him? And we managed to have a really civil conversation, which was lovely. And the other day, he, having gone from almost estrangement 2 years ago, the other day he said to me, we were walking out of the house, and he went, Mum, I think we get on better now than we ever have. And that is just not something I would have dreamed about a couple of years ago. So holding our beliefs lightly, even when we are, we're really struggling, but looking for those generative questions, that pause. How can this be different? Thinking about Fran and, looking at things from a different perspective, that reframe.
Yeah.
What else could this look like?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Fran.
I was just wondering if we want to bring in our colleagues into our conversation, because I'm seeing some activity in the chat. So
there's some cool things happening in the chat.
We also have two questions that if we can, and these are from people that are in the conversation. One of them, she says, I feel more comfortable handling this when I know the people and their intent, and I feel safe in communicating. But how do you suggest I handle it with coworkers who sometimes I don't know well and whose intentions may be very different from mine? What if they tend to mobilize group support in their favor and come at me? How do I stand up for what I believe is the right thing without antagonizing or polarizing the group?
Great question. I'll take a pass at just, I think, kind of one of the first pieces of that I heard embedded in that, excuse me. And then I'd love to learn from everyone else. I think, the starting frame of that was, do we know people, and how that may shift who we are and how we are in some of these conversations versus people that we maybe aren't as affiliated with or have that may be a familial connection or a friendship. And I think one of the things that that came to my mind is a lot of times there's a principle or a fable, or I don't know what we'll call it, a bumper sticker, to go slow, to go fast, to go far. And I think Conversations Worth Having allows for that. You go slow at first, right? These are just, we're exploring, we're having very exploratory conversations on your needs, your preferences, and then inviting others to talk about their needs and their preferences and their visions and their hopes. And I think that's where a lot of the work starts from, right? Like creating the fertile ground that these conversations can happen. It feels sometimes, I think, especially in polarizing or maybe kind of lightning rod types of issues, that we want to jump right to the issue. But I think we have to build that understanding first. So we go slow to go fast, to go far. If we don't do that, what might feel like slow work first to just get to know people, get to understand people, then we can go faster and farther on actually dealing with the issue. The issue is the opportunity to be built on relationship. So that was that first part of the question that I heard that I'll grab onto, and that's never wasted time, right? Going slower and building that shared understanding, getting to know people, and not just getting to know them in a surface way, but getting to understand them is part of the beauty of this work and the value of this work. What other things, when you guys heard that question, what came up?
I've got some immediate thoughts. Jane, you okay if I jump in?
Yeah, absolutely, Fran. Go for it.
When I hear this question, what comes to mind for me is this idea of like this things come between us, and it's my way or your way, or my way or your way, right? And that we're like in this tug of war situation, and with coming with an objective of like trying to win. And I think that's what escalates the difference and actually tightens the knot rather than trying to loosen the knot to figure out how to move forward on this. I'm always looking for ways to shift it from this thing being between us to being side by side. And now this is a shared situation that we are side by side trying to figure this out. And so that what I would try to do, and I'm always brought into situations where I don't know the people, like I never know what's happening. And I'm brought in probably much like you in your work, all is like, sometimes they're looking at me as a common enemy, right? Because like I'm trying to fix something that they don't really like, for some reason it's working for them. And so one of the things that I've learned that I think is really important is conflicts often emerge with the positions related to the conflict, like above the waterline, using that iceberg metaphor. And we try to negotiate above the waterline, but that's just the position that somebody's taking about something. There's so much more under that water. And so the best thing that I can do in those situations, even when I'm feeling emotionally overwhelmed because of the energy that's coming at me, is to slow down and get intensely curious. I want to understand their iceberg better than they understand it. Because chances are that they have been championing the above the waterline part of that iceberg for a really long time. And they may have even lost their own understanding or connection to why that mattered to them. So the process of me slowing down and becoming intensely curious and getting deeper and deeper in that iceberg does a couple of things. One is they can feel immensely heard because they don't have to fight to get their message across because I'm asking questions and I'm intensely curious. And as soon as that emotionality has gone down a little bit, now I can share my iceberg. Or to say, what's at stake if we don't find common ground here? Or these are the things I learned. But so much of this is, and I think Tara was saying it before, like so much of this is about almost like managing the emotion that's attached to things. And so when those things are coming at us with all that energy, my first dance is with the energy, not with the topic.
Fran, that's really speaking to me. And you mentioned there around people being heard and wanting to feel heard. It's one of the most powerful things for people to just feel like they're really truly being heard.
There's one more scenario question that I would love to share so that you can get an opportunity to respond. The situation is I'm a library director at a mid-sized public library in Metro Detroit. Two of my department heads are often at odds with each other. Their communication styles are different, and they're at play. They're both very strong individuals, and they frequently clash over a fundamental aspect of library service: patron privacy versus empathetic, flexible service. And instead of talking to each other or bringing the topic to a leadership team meeting, they complain about each other to me. And I'm biased towards one of them for style reasons and the value I favor. I would like the two of them to talk about their differences in approach so they can figure out how to integrate both their values in a way that flexes when needed. How do I support other people in having a conversation worth having when they're polarized?
Can I pick up on this? It sort of relates to what Fran was talking about in terms of the people being heard and that understanding. And thank you for raising this question. I don't know if the person has joined that asked and posed this question. There's just something here around, again, on understanding. Why is this, what is this viewpoint? Why is it important to you, so that we can get to that deeper level of understanding? And I think acknowledging that we are looking at things from different perspectives, but what is the understanding around this? Tell me more around this. Why is it important to you? And how could it be important maybe to the wider institution or organization? But the understanding feels important here. I'm going to hand over.
I'll just agree with that. I think oftentimes it's either the blessing or curse, the advantage or disadvantage of being, I find myself in a role where I'm invited into the opportunity to facilitate or moderate or, whatever the label might be, these conversations. And so it's a different challenge to not be, not be the person invited in to say, help us fix this. It's sort of, you're the proactive convener. You're the one convening or having that desire to convene. And I think it does put a strong value and an onus on you as the person, the person seeking to convene others to resolve an issue, to really understand your position in that and your own role in that, and understand what that will do for you, for them, for the broader organization. So just deeply understanding yourself as a proactive convener is different than, someone saying, hey, we have an issue, can you come help? You're saying, hey, you have an issue, I'm here to help. There's a different level of deepening your own understanding first before you ever think about their conversation. Fran, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I come at this really concretely, and at the risk of it being sort of prescriptive, let me just share with you sort of the steps that go through my head. I don't know if the person that's in the middle here is a person that's like of rank, is like a boss, or whether it's a colleague or peer, because I think that might matter a little bit. But what I would probably say is, let's acknowledge these differences. Let's acknowledge that we haven't figured out how to navigate these in productive ways. And that I would invite us to try something here. And I'm going to invite us to try this framework, right? Because we haven't gotten through this yet. And I would probably do a little bit of education about the framework just so people can see what's going on so they don't feel manipulated or anything like that, and say, okay, what we want to first do is we want to try to stay above the line here. So let's stay in this appreciative, positive, forward-focused space. And then let's really lean into inquiry around this, because that's going to cause us to think rather than react. And what we really need here is good thinking. So let's talk in that space. And then as the convener, as the host, as the facilitator, our responsibility in that role, right, is to hold the crucible in which the magic happens. And so that's where the generative questions come in. Now, I'm always keeping generative questions like within arm's reach, because I can't necessarily think of them on the spot when there's a lot of emotionality. But to say, we've got really a lot of energy and a lot of passion, and all of these perspectives, or these two perspectives, have incredible validity. How do we learn? How do we know how to choose which approach? How do we harness the best from both of them? Again, how could this be our finest moment? Or what's our highest aspiration related to navigating these differences in a way that not only serves the organization and the patrons, but all of us in relationship? But I'm going to always try to ask like the aspirational question, because the folks that are coming to the conversation are like right here with whatever it is. And I feel like part of my job, or our job, is to look past that for like, what's the real potential that lies here and how can we unlock it? The gift that I hear in this library situation is you have professionals that are incredibly vested. What a gift, right? Because it's the apathetic employee that's really the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So now you've got these spirited individuals, you've got a lot of energy. How do we dance with it together? So that's just kind of, but I would play with the model. Like I would actually say, let's do, 10 minutes of understanding this, and let's join me on this landscape. Let's see what we can possibly learn together.
And I want to add just a thought on, this is maybe more of like a tactical piece, but I think it's important in polarizing issues. People are already heightened, right? We can go into the neuroscience of it, or we can think about what's going on in the brain. And it's real, right? People are already heightened. And so I think one of the things that we've all kind of alluded to in different ways is talking about kind of like we did at the beginning of the session, pulling the curtain back. I'm not going to try to do any sort of weird witchcraft on you. I'm not trying to manipulate you. This is the framework. I've often put the little schematic of name it, flip it, frame it up on a screen, or have someone I think asked a question earlier about using metaphors. Anything that can pull the curtain back and let people know, I'm not trying to manipulate you. I'm not trying to change your mind. Here's what I'm trying to do. I find myself often very overt and very transparent. I do a short teaching piece on what we're going to be doing before we do it, because when there's already that sense of heightened emotion on polarizing issues, they're back to emotion again. It helps people, I think, drop into that space of being able to participate in the thing when they know what the thing is. And I just wanted to say the utility I found in being very transparent, of telling people what we're going to do before we do it, to manage some of that, what could be emotion, difficult emotion.
And Tara, that's if I may just pick up on that, I think just the container space that you're building for that discussion and creating that psychological safe space where people can be heard, they can be listened to, they can appreciate different points of views. For me, that's always part of the initial conversation. How do we set ourselves up for success, but how do we set ourselves up to have these conversations so that everybody is coming to these conversations from an open point of view?
Yeah.
Respectful.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's wonderful. We have about 3 minutes for any other questions, or if anybody wants to unmute and engage with the 3 of them, we'd like to invite you to do that. And then I'm just going to close with a really quick slide to give you their contact information in case you want to get a hold of them. So if you have a question or you want to share anything at all, feel free to just unmute and speak up.
Feeling really grateful to everyone who's in our Zoom room today, especially to our speakers and to Jackie and Sherry for offering this for us, right? Because we all, I guess, are to some degree are experiencing these things personally, professionally, and I'm feeling overwhelmingly grateful for this opportunity and for the wisdom that has surfaced in this conversation today. So thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. I was taking lots of notes. I learned a ton from.
Yes, I tried to capture things also in the chat for people so that, and I do want to let everyone know that we will make the recording available. It'll be on our website and on our YouTube channel. And we're also going to turn parts of this into blog posts. Kelly has volunteered to re-listen to the video and pull out little short pieces that will be available on the blog.
Firing snippets.
That's cool.
And we really welcome and encourage you to share the outcomes, either the blog or the video, with others, because it's not just a national, it is a global issue. And what the 3 of you has shared, I think, has been profound in helping people to think about, how do I do this differently so that I can build connection and unity and so many metaphors, so we can stand side by side and walk towards something we both want.
And I just want to say to Tara and Kelly and Jane, listen to their tone. Their tone was very appreciative today in their nature. So when you're in a real polarized situation, not only the words you say, but how you say it. You ladies were grace, you were poised, and you were full of appreciation. And you really practiced that pausing, even when looking at a couple of the tough scenarios today. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And if you'd like to get in touch with any one of them, here's their contact information. If you have questions or you need anybody to come help you deal with polarizing situations in your community or your business, you now know these are women that can help you with that.
And I just will say, I love talking about this stuff because every vignette and every situation has this kind of role play and sort of think about how would we navigate it. So, you don't have to reach out for me because you're looking for somebody to do my work. I'm happy to be a thinking partner to just sort of say, how might we do this together? Because there's so much learning there.
Likewise, Fran. I think we're all working this stuff out, and I think just we don't have to be perfect with it, but just trying some of these practices. For me, I'm relatively new to conversations worth having, and I think just trying the practices and wanting to do something different. Right. Give it a go.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's no lack of opportunity to just have these kinds of conversations with each other anytime we can. I find it a gift. This was a gift. Thanks, Sherry, for setting up a conversation where I could talk with 2 new friends in such a meaningful way. I'm feeling as grateful as Kelly described. So thank you.
Thank you, Tara, Fran, and Jane, so much for your time, your wisdom, and your energy on this. This was really wonderful. Thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone. We'll
Thank
be
you.
back in touch for the next community call.
Thank
Everyone,
you.
be well.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.